Hi, Freddie. Um, I'm back, and once again, I hope you're finding everything okay. Um, your sec, your session 4 homework. Your teachers have wanted you to actually just jot down either on a notebook or else even on post-it notes, like little notes that you might be interested in. Um, like if you find something very interesting or if you're not certain about something, if you have a question, or you might even find it funny. She wants you to jot it down, and then when you get together with your other book club members, you can talk about it. She just wants you to be able to not just listen to the story and read the story. She wants you to be able to talk about it, to see, to go further into the story and get more out of the story. This is actually a very interesting story. And like I was sitting at home the other night, and after reading the story to you, I came up with a couple things on my own. I was thinking, like, how in the world did Harry become such a good person? When he was raised by the Dursleys, and they were all very greedy, and Dudley had been bullying him his whole life, and that he lived in a cupboard. Um, and he very, seldom had a birthday gift. The one birthday gift he mentioned, was a clothes hanger and a pair of old socks um, that were Mr. Darcy's. Uh, how can he become such a great kid when he was raised in such an environment that was very unloving to him? And I had made note on that on my paper. I just wrote down different things that was coming to my mind. I mean, I would thought he would have been just as bad as Dudley. Um, and then what I also did is, because I had written down some of the things directly out of the book, I had wrote on the little post-it notes exactly where I'd found it, and like little clues to help me to remember. So when I can go back, I can say, "Oh yeah, that's what I meant here." Like this one said, there was no finer boy around. And the story was talking about the Darsley had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy around. And remember, Dudley is the one that was throwing tetra tantrums, throwing his cereal against the wall. He had he had only at his day of his birthday, the table was filled with all sorts of presents, and he was upset because there was only 36 and not 39, like he wanted more than what was last year, and last year I think it was 38, so he wanted 39 presents. And he broke them all within a week afterwards. And then also I had another quote that there was, and here I wrote, they didn't want Harry mixing with Dudley, and that was because I had written down, when they talked about Harry, they said the boy was another reason for keeping the Potters away from their Dudley. They didn't want their Dudley mixing with a child like that. And actually, I wouldn't want my child mixing with Dudley. I didn't want my kid to have bad habits like Dudley has. Um, so that's what your teacher really wants you to do, is just to make little notes. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long page like I wrote. It can just be something little. It's just something so you can remember or go back to and say, hey, I'm confused about this. What is this for? Or why did they do that? And why not say something different? Um, and then throughout the whole book, I have several post-it notes that I will be putting in this book. And as you can see, I have quite a few as it is, anyways. You don't need to have as many as I do, just a couple of them. Um, just start out with a couple of them, one or two, and then just go. Every time there's a chapter read, that you read a chapter, maybe try to put another one in there. I know with this, I'm always wondering, why in the world did they do that? Why did they choose that word? Or even, what word What does a certain word mean? Like there's a word or in this next chapter that I'm reading, that I will be reading to you, the word toil. What does toil mean? I know for myself that it means to work, to be a good worker, a hard worker. Um, Not everybody knows that word. There's a lot of words in here that I don't understand because it's written like an English slang word. You know, we're not perfect. Just as long as you write something down, that's all we really need. Let me get started on reading the next chapter. Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. This is a fun one. You'll really enjoy this one. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that she was no one to cross. The first year's Professor McGonagall, said Hagrid. Thank you, Hagrid. I will take it from here. She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could fit the whole of Darsley's house in it. The stone wall was lit with flame torches like the ones the Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make it out. A magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from the doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in. They crowded in rather closely together than they usually would have been, peering about nervously. Welcome to Hogwarts, said Professor McGonagall. The start of the term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of the house, sleep in your house dormitory, spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are here, Hogwarts, your trophies will earn your house points. Your triumphs will earn your house points, while any breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded a house cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whatever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few moments in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all straighten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously flattened his hair. I shall return when we are ready for you, said Professor McGonagall. Please wait quietly. She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. How exactly do they sort us into houses? He asked Ron. Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking. Harry's heart gave a huge jolt. A test in front of the whole school? Well, but he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected anything like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she had learned and wondering which one of them she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never ever. Not even when he'd had to take the school's report home to the Dursleys, saying that he had somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor Grummagall, McGonagall would come back and lead him to his dorms. Then something happened. That made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts just streamed through the back wall, pearly white and slightly transparent. They glided around the room, talking to one another, hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forget and forgive, I say. You ought to give him a second chance. My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, and you know he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New student," said the fat friar, smiling around at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony's about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind the boy with the sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out the chamber, back across the hall and through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering gold plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students. With the teachers behind him, the hundreds of faces staring at them, looking like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelights, dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone most misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open up into the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed to be the sort of a thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was a complete silence. Then the hat twisted. A rip from the brim opened wide, like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge me for what you see. I'll eat myself if you find out. A smarter hat than me. You keep your howls black, your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall. For I'm a Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell where you ought to be. You ought, you might belong to Gryffindor, where you dwell the brave at heart. They're daring, nervy, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong to Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Huffendorfs are true and unafraid of toil, or set in a wise old claw. If you're a ready mind, those where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use their any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in a safe hands, though I have none, for I'm the thinking cap. The whole house burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the four tables and then began quite still again. So we've just got to try in the hat, Ron whispered to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell. But did he wish he could have tried it on without everybody watching? The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel a bit brave or quick-witted or any of it for that matter in the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott Hannah, a pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails, stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment paused. Huff and Puff, shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Huff and Puff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones! Susan! Huff and Puff, shouted the hat again, and Susan started off to sit next to Hannah. Boot! Terry! Ravenclaw! The table, second from the left, clapped. This time, several Ravenclaws stood up and shook hands with Terry as he joined them. Brooklehurst, Mandy, went to Ravenclaw too. But Brown Lavender became the first Gryffindor. The table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bucklestraw Millicent. That became Slytherin's. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after all he's heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for the teams during gym at his old school. He had always been the last to be chosen, not because he was not good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch, Frickley, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan, Simonis, A sandy-haired boy next to Harry in line sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Grange, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thing struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen? What if he just sat there and the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train. Then Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toe, was called. He he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finished, it shouted, Gryffindor. Neville ran off the stool wearing it and had to jog to back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDowell Morgan. Montfrey swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat was barely touched his head when it screamed Slytherin. Montfrey went to join his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There wasn't many people left now. Moon, Nort, Parkinson. There were a pair of twin girls, Partel and Partel. Then Perils, Sally Ann, and then at last Potter, Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out like little hisses, fires all over the hall. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was a hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great. You know, it's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on your way to the greatness. No doubt about that. No, well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word of the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily towards the Gryffindor table. He was relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheers of all. Yet Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley's twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the ruffle he had seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry a sudden horrible feeling he had just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end nearest him was Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. Harry grinned back, and there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, was Albus Dumbledore. He recognized him at once for the card he had gotten out of the chocolate frogs on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there were only three people left to be sorted. Thomas Dean, a black boy, even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Trumpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now. Harry crossed his fingers under the table, and a second later the hat shouted, Gryffindor! Harry clapped loudly with the rest of as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. Well done, Ron. Excellent, said Percy Weasley, prosperly across Harry as Zaboni Blaze was made a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up the scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at the empty gold plates. He had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students. His arms opened wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see all of them here. Welcome, he said. Welcome to the new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Nitwit, blunder, oddment, tweak. Thank you. He sat down. Everyone clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Is he a bit mad? He asked Percy uncertainly. Mad? Said Percy airily. He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry? Harry's mouth flew open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he'd like to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, bacon, and steaks. Boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except for peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. That does look good, said the ghost in the rough, sadly watching Harry cut up his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten for nearly 400 years, said the ghost. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas D. Mansley Porpenton, at your service, resident ghost, Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brothers told me about you. You're nearly Headless Nick. I prefer you call me Sir Nicholas de Menzy, the ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going at all the way he wanted. Like this, he said irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. His whole head swung off his neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was on a hinge. Somebody had obviously tried to behead him, but had not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, nearly headless Nick flipped his head back onto his neck, coughed, and said, So, new Gryffindors, I hope you are going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have got the cup 6 years in a row. The bloody Baron's becoming almost unbearable. He's the Slytherin's ghost. Harry looked over at the Slytherin's table and saw the horrible ghost sitting there with a blank staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robe stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who Harry, pleased to see, didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. How did he get covered in blood? Asked Simos with great interest. I never asked, said nearly headless Nick delicately. When everyone ate as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the tables, leaving them sparkling clean as it was before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you can think of. Apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, and jam donuts. Trifles, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. Harry was helping himself to a treacle tart. The talk turned to their families. I'm a half and half, said Seamus. My dad's a muggle. My mother didn't tell him she was a witch until after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed. What about you, Neville? Said Ron. Well, my gran brought me up, and she's a witch, said Neville. But the family thought I was all muggle for ages. My great uncle, Argy, kept trying to catch me off guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the edge of a black pool pier once. I nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great Uncle Augie came around for dinner, and he was hanging me out of an upstairs window by the ankles when Great Aunt Eldon offered him a meringue. He accidentally let go, but I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy. And you should have seen their faces when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come. You see, Great Uncle Augie was so pleased he brought me my toad. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration. You know, turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting out small, just matches into needles and that sort of thing. Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quill, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and shallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hooked-nosed teacher looked past Quill's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot through the scar on Harry's forehead. Ouch! Harry clapped a hand to his head. What is it? Said Percy. No, nothing. The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Harder to shake off was a feeling that Harry had gotten from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's the teacher talking to Professor Quill? He asked Percy. Oh, you know Quill's already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quill's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts. Snape. Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the desserts too disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet. The hall fell silent. Just a few more words. Now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils, and a few of our older students would do well to remember that also. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the directions of the Weasleys. I have also been asked by Mr. Flitch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridor. Quidditch trials will be held the second week of term. Anyone interested in playing for their home teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not want to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but was one of the few who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Percy. Must be, said Percy, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd, because he usually gives us a reason why. We don't. We're not allowed to go somewhere. The dark forest full of dangerous beasts. Everyone knows that. I do think he might have told us prefix at least. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick, as if he was trying to get a fly off the end. A long golden ribbon flew out of its end, which rose high above the tables and twisted itself snake-like into words. Everyone pick your favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. The school bellowed. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy, Warty, Hogwarts. Teach us something, please, whether we be old or bald, or young with stable knees. Our heads could do with filling with some interesting stuff. For now we'll have full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back whatever we forgot. Just do your best. We'll do the rest and learn until our brains all rot. Everyone finished the song at different times. At last, only the Weasley twins were left singing along to a very slow funeral march. Dumbledore conducted with their last few lines with his wand, and when they finished, he was one of those who clapped loudest. Ah, music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. The Gryffindor's first year followed Percy through the chanting crowds, out of the great hall and up the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like lead again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that twice Percy had led them through doorways hidden behind sliding panels and hanging tapestries. They climbed more staircases, yawning and dragging their feet. Harry was just wondering how much further they had to go when they came into a sudden halt. A bundle of walking sticks were floating in midair, heading for them, and Percy took a step towards them. They started throwing themselves at him. Peeves, Percy whispered to the first years. A poltergeist. He raised his voice. Peeves, show yourself. A loud, rude sound, like the air being let out of a balloon, answered. Do you want me to go to Lady Bloody Baron's? There was a pop, and a little man with wicked dark eyes and wide mouth appeared, floating cross-legged in the air, clutching the walking sticks. Oh, he said with an evil chuckle. Icky firsties. What fun. He swooshed suddenly at them. They ducked. Go away, Peeves, or the Baron will hear about this. I mean it, barked Percy. Peeves stuck out his tongue and vanished, dropping the walking sticks at Neville's head. They heard him zooming past them, rattling coats of arms as they passed. You want to watch out for Peeves, said Percy, as he set off again. The bloody Baron's the only one who can control him. He won't even listen to our prefects. Here we are. At the very end of the corridor hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink dress. Password, she said. Captain Dragendorf, said Percy, and the portrait swung forward to reveal a round hole in the wall. They all scrambled through. Neville needed a leg up and found themselves in Gravendor's common room, a cozy room full of squatty armchairs. Percy directed the girls through one door to their dormitory and the boys through another. At the top of the spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their beds at last, 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks were already brought up. Too tired to think much, they pulled on their pajamas and fell asleep. Great food, isn't it? Ron muttered to Harry through the hangings. Get off, Scrabbles. He's chewing my sheets. Harry was going to ask Ron if he had any of the treacle tart, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Grill's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened painfully, and there was Malfoy laughing at him as he struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into a hooked-nosed teacher, Snape, whose laugh became higher and cold. It was a burst of green light, and Harry woke up sweaty and shaky. He rolled over and fell asleep, and when he woke the next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. Okay, that was a fun chapter to read. I did come up with a few post-it notes of my own. One of them was, what do you think you would have been if the Sorting Hat if you had the Sorting Hat on your head? Do you think you would have been Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, or a Hufflepuff? Hufflepuff? I thought I would be a Hufflepuff because I am loyal and I do have patience, and I'm not afraid to work. Remember when I talked earlier that the word toil meant to work? I kind of feel like I'm a hard worker, and so that's what I would be. I wonder what you would think of yourself. I kind of would think you would be a Hufflepuff myself. Okay. The other thing that I did that I was thinking about at the end of the book, at the end of the chapter, what does Harry's dream mean? Do you remember back when he was getting his wand and the wizard that was giving him was fitting him for his wand said that Voldemort, who had the wand similar to his, was from Slytherin, and that he thought that was very interesting. Well, why was the turban telling him he should go to Slytherin then, that he should transfer? So I thought that was very interesting too. And then also Dumbledore's I thought this was kind of funny. Dumbledore said he had a few words to say, and then he said all those nonsense words like nitwit, bludder, oddment, tweak, and then thanks. He didn't give a long speech like you would have thought he would have. He just said those words. Okay, so on to the next chapter.